All right, welcome to our seventh presentation, which is our final one for the copyright section. So this week we'll have our test for section one and prepare for moving over to section two, which is going to be an introduction to licensing. And so this presentation, I do want to sort of recap a few high points of copyright, and go over once again why it's important to have that understanding of copyright before you get into licensing. And so one of the ways that we can see the enterprise of the music licensor is through the idea of copyright severability. And so this idea of split copyright is a really good perspective to at once, look back on what we've come to understand about copyright, and then to look forward to the idea of how to exploit copyright, right? So remember that exploitation is this idea that while we have the system of protection, we're protected to control the property, right, and to manipulate the property and to get the property placed in money-making or lucrative situations. And so that is exploitation, right? Placing the property in money-making, licensing it, selling it, giving access to the property to music users themselves that will pay, and those will become royalties. Right? So the entire enterprise of making money off of copyright through licensing is exploitation. Okay, let's see. All right, so I want to use this opportunity to review the bundle of rights and then a few of the aspects of copyright. So I want to kind of take a global view of copyright, get away from duration for a minute, get away from infringement for a minute, and just look at copyright as such, so that we can understand this idea of what the implications of splitting it up are, how it is split, and then that will allow us to see the enterprise of the music publisher, I think, pretty clearly. And so then we'll end with this chart that is the fourth section on the duration worksheet, which is the music pipeline. So this is a really useful diagram of what music publishers do and where they position themselves, and how copyright gives rise to licensing and gives rise to additional licenses, additional forms of copyright. And so that's the music pipeline. That's what we'll end with. Okay, so copyright is actually a collection of copyrights. I wonder if I can play this thing, because that does look a lot better. Okay. So it's called copyright, but it includes a bundle of rights. So you've got this collection of underlying rights that are held within the copyright. So you've got the rights of duplication and distribution, right? So what are we copying? And then what do we intend to do with those copies, right? So the act of copying, of course, is to duplicate. And then the idea is that we're going to distribute them for sale. So that's those are what I would consider to be the main two types of rights that are associated with copyright. And duplication by way of what? So you're going to perform it. You're going to make mechanical copies of it that you need a machine, right, to perceive. So a recording that you need a Pro Tools player or computer to hear, or a CD, in the olden days. Or you're going to duplicate it by inserting it into a film. And so there's going to be a display component to it, so there's synchronization there. Or you're going to duplicate it onto sheet music, so there's a display component there, and you'll sell that to marching band director. etc. So we need to understand that even though copyright looks simple on the surface, oh, there's a copyright to the song. Well, there's actually all these underlying rights. We've got five of them here, four Ds and a P. So distribution, duplication, derivatives, display, and then the P is performance. So that's review. So it gives you an idea of sort of this complexity. And another part of the complexity of copyright is the fact that it's mobile, right? And so copyright can pass from an author to their heirs, right, or their quote successors. And so the right of succession is typically from a between spouse. So if a female creator or poet passes away, then it's her husband that becomes the first in line there, and then children, and then parents, and then siblings. Um, there is a um, an order of succession where property passes down specific family lines. And so copyright is, of course, a form of property. It's private property. It's not physical. It is intellectual. And so it will follow along those same lines of succession. So it's mobile in that respect. We'll recall that it's also mobile in the event that it can be transferred. So from the author to the author slash owner, right? So following the Statute of Anne from 1710, ever since 1710, authorship has meant ownership. So authorship equals ownership. But authors and owners, just because you're an owner doesn't mean that you're the best person to actually place the thing, right? So that's why we have the music publisher comes in as this sort of hyper-connected industry, player that can, be a matchmaker for, different kinds of properties, recordings, or songs with different kinds of users, film producers, record companies, on down the line. So authors, clearly composers need publishers because they're usually not super connected. They may have a sphere of influence around them, but just because they know a bunch of other songwriters or musicians or producers doesn't know that they also know film directors, for example. And so there's an entire slate of industry there that's not, accessible to that example of a songwriter. And so when a publisher comes along, that copyright is actually transferred in the publishing agreement from the owner, the composer as the owner, to the publisher for a specific period of time. In the event that or I should say, then the publisher turns around and will then transfer or assign that copyright to an exclusive licensee. So an exclusive licensee is a licensee that is the only one that's allowed to use this intellectual property, song or recording, for example, for however long the license is good for. Let me see here if I can get out of this. No, I'm still going. That's good. Okay, I'm going to get back to this and this. There we go. That's almost it. Sorry for the technical issues here. Okay, that's pretty good. So the copyright is moving around along the lines of inheritance, but also from the writer to the publisher, and then from the publisher to a music user. If the license is exclusive, then usually that copyright will move again. And so you're seeing it kind of bouncing along there from individual to individual. And then in the instance that the original author is unhappy with the publisher or the job that they're doing, or for any reason they want to get their copyright back, the U.S. Law does provide for a 5-year window of recapture around year 35 after that transfer, right, after the initial agreement between the songwriter and the publisher starts, where they can get it back again. So now you're seeing copyright moving, all along, and then finally back, thanks to the termination and recapture laws. So to add to this, I want to introduce or bring us back to this idea of severability, or the idea of severance itself. So to sever something is to separate or cut off, right? So we've seen several liability in the case of the infringement cases. In the instance where the direct infringer maybe is broke, or a starving artist, they may not be able to satisfy the finding of the court and to pay the full penalty, and so that's where you have the contributory infringer and the vicarious infringer. They can also be found liable, and so you have all of these parties together, which they are, as a group, several people are required to carry the liability and each pay, right, before the fine is paid up completely. And so we've seen that already, this idea of severance and in this case several liability. Copyright itself also has what's referred to as severability. And so severability means that an owner can carve up their property, right, by rights. So you can give, suppose I got one of my songs and I wanted to give the synchronization right, to a film producer by an exclusive license. And so the rest of the rights from the bundle are not assigned. So the performance right, or whatever, let's see, the right for derivative would be a better example. That would remain with me, while the synchronization right, and in the case of a movie, you would need the performance right to go as well. But the point is that the rights themselves within the copyright can be licensed out, and more to the point, percentages within those rights can also be licensed out. And the way that makes the most sense, when you read the cone chapters that I provided, they are showing how when you have multiple copyright owners, that copyright will be divided up by percentage. And so you've got a million ways to carve this thing up. It can be granted by right, or I can give, writer A will give their 25% of the synchronization and performance right within their copyright to the film producer. And then the other two writers will be asked to do that as well. But as you can see, it gets very, very complex, where you've got, three owners, each talking about percentages of one of the rights from the bundle of rights. And so this has, several sort of implications for licensing. So severability and the mobility of copyright, creates a potentially complex scenario, as we just said. You've got multiple parties, or when you have multiple parties participating in the same copyright, each to various percentages, it can become a bit of a nightmare to account for royalties. Even just finding the contact information to get permission for the license to be drafted, much less calculating the actual royalties. And so, users like filmmakers, for example, aren't going to want to go through all of that to get permission for one song. You've got to make, 4 or 5 different phone calls, try to get people on the same page. And then imagine that you've got one of them that's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm still angry about how the tour ended back in, 84 or whatever. So it's potentially a nightmare. And so there's a need for solutions here. One of the solutions is, based on the kinds of rights we're talking about, there are these things called clearinghouses. And so Harry Fox is perhaps the most, well-known. ASCAP and BMI are also technically clearinghouses, which means that they're like a one-stop shopping. So if I am a record company and I have an artist that wants to do a cover song, how do I get permission for that? So as a record company, we're creating Circle P, which is going to need um, a machine to basically play this product, and so the mechanical right is the one that goes for record companies, um, and so Harry Fox is, like I said, a one-stop shopping. I would call them up and tell them what I'm looking for, and then they're the ones that have a collection of account holders, and so they can just scroll through the list and find the song, and they can very quickly find out who it belongs to. Same thing for radio stations or anyone who needs to pay for the right of performance. Whether it's at a venue or live on the air, they can go to BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, and a couple others here in the United States that are smaller to very quickly and easily identify who the stakeholders are, who are the owners, who's the publisher is usually the first thing, and then the publisher sort of takes care of the songwriter. And so that's one way to get around this deal. Another way to deal with the complexity is what's referred to as an administration deal. And so an administration deal is usually when you have a songwriter or composer or a group of them that are already so well known and established, they don't need a publisher to get out there and sort of market and plug and really work and exploit their tunes or recordings, because they're already so well known that people are kind of already calling for them. They don't have to go persuade people to use their properties. And so in this instance, an administrative publisher is going to be the one that just handles the paperwork and doesn't really do the calling, pitching, trying to place the stuff, just kind of handling the influx of interest, and then dealing with the licensing and the the accounting side of it, processing royalties, and then issuing financial statements on a monthly or usually semi-annual basis. So every 6 months. And so the administrative publisher is a really good way to have a music industry specialist that is able to deal with this complex picture in a very sort of simplified way. So the clearinghouses on one side that can issue the licenses for performance or mechanicals in the case of Harry Fox and ASCAP and the rest, or administrative publishers if the properties are getting different kinds of uses that are beyond just the mechanicals and the performance, like synchronization for film, for example. And so that is one way to simplify the picture. Another way is what I refer to as the music pipeline. So this comes from the phrase pipeline income. And pipeline income is a phrase that refers to the check being in the mail, right? So you've got pipeline income, meaning that the permission has been granted, the production is underway, and they're settling up the accounts, and so the property's generating money. It just hasn't all kind of settled yet and made its way back to the owner or the publisher, who then pays the owner typically. And so this idea of a pipeline, so music, there's a pipeline meaning that there's money in the works, right? Royalties are coming, they're forthcoming. Rights have been granted, permission has been granted, and exploitation is underway. Products are being generated, and so it's an interesting kind of idea to map out, right? So how does the pipeline allow us to imagine how copyright moves from owners to users, and how that movement creates not only new copyrights but opportunities for access, meaning licenses, right? If you have license, that means you have the key to get in to the property. And it also provides an overview of how the transfer of rights via licenses generates royalties and their movement back to owners. And so let me see if I can find myself. Here I am. Okay, cool. Oops. Guess I'm going to have to end the show. So let's check that out. Okay, this goes over here. All right. Okay, so let's check out this pipeline. So the music pipeline shows, and this is what you have on the last handout we did, which is the music, the duration worksheet. So we did sections 1, 2, and 3, but there's a section 4, which is called the music pipeline. And so what you see is that it's arranged in columns, right? But it's also arranged in rows. So left to right, you see color coordinated rows. So what you see here is the flow of the pipeline is kind of like a circle, right? So it's kind of like a wave in the ocean that's breaking, right? Surfers are in. So you've got rights that are going across the top, and they're passing from the owner through the instrument of right granting, which is the license, to the user, who then is using the property in some way to generate income. And then the consumer is sort of triggering these royalties with their consumption or their purchase. So they're record buyers, movie theater ticket buyers, concert goers, marching band directors. These are all users of intellectual property, or consumers, I should say, of intellectual property, that as they buy in to whatever the product is, are participating and sort of triggering the turn of the flow of rights now turns into a flow of royalties. So you can see that across the bottom here, the flow of royalties is coming back across to the owner, the ownership sort of group, which is typically a songwriter. Is the author is the owner according to 1710 Statute of Anne, and they need a representative that's going to get out there with their industry contacts, and that's the music publisher. So that's your ownership group, right? And they are top left here, and that's where the whole thing starts. Passes through these sort of intermediaries, right? And music industry players, all the way to the consumer, and then the consumer symbolizes the shift of rights into royalties. Right? The users have the right to create the product to sell to the consumer, who then, with their purchase, creates royalties that flow back through the system. And so, what this is useful is not only to see how that, and so this takes in the old music. The old record industry, when record industries ran the music business, this was about an 18-month pipeline, and that's still a pretty good rule of thumb. So that means that between the time when the record company approaches the publisher and says, we want permission to record this song, and the time where the publisher actually sees a check, meaning that the artist has to come in, they do the record, they do the overdubs, the mixes, they get the marketing package together, it hits the streets, and then there's another 6 months just for, the first accounting usually from the labels. That's going to be, roughly, 12 to 18 months depending on your genre. And so the check in the mail thing, it's real. Nowadays, writing checks are still, of course, issued. Things are probably a bit faster. But anyway, this is the sort of world that this idea comes from. So it's useful to see, the macro level of, now we can start to identify all these music business players, right? There's the record company, I see the film producer, the broadcaster, sheet music publisher, and this is just a sample, right? You can put a lot of different people in this chart. But the important thing is that, you see that the flow of rights is going across owner, license, through the license to the user or the licensee, and then the consumer. So those are your columns. But then you can also see the color-coded part in the rows, how, the record company requires a mechanical license, right? The film producer requires a synchronization license. The venue or broadcaster both require a public performance license. Someone who's going to get a book deal and turn a book into a movie, that would be a derivative form. They're making a new work that's based on the previous work. So, you know, a book deal or turning a play into a movie or a movie deal, those are all would require a derivative license. So that could be, down here at this bottom. But this is, once again, just an example of how the music business is arranged, and this big map is exactly what the publisher, this is the publisher's perspective on the music business. So this is really the best way to recognize licensing, and the complexities of it, but on a single page. And so it's kind of simplified. And so that's why I like to use this to introduce licensing, or to kind of turn the page from copyright to licensing, because we see, in these licenses that you've got, the right of display. So here you've got the bundle of rights are sort of embedded. The right of performance, right? The right of duplication and distribution here. This is another right of display. And then the right of derivative was the rights deal to turn a book into a movie or something like that. Or even to do a translation or to put illustrations in a book. Those are all works based on, those would all be derivative license deals. So please do use this to fill out your, section 4 of the duration worksheet. We won't need that for the test. All you'll need for the test will be the worksheets themselves, except for section 4, which is the music pipeline, and to go back through the presentation videos and make note of any specialty vocabulary I use that is very particular to our first section. And so terms like derivative, or synchronization, recapture, termination and recapture of copyright. There are, every presentation that I make, there are probably 4 or 5 terms that are very specific to this topic, copyright and licensing. Well, we're not to licensing yet. And so do yourself a favor, go back and make sure you've got your to study for this test. It'll be 20 questions, multiple choice, half point each. There'll be a couple true false in there as well, which is technically a multiple choice. It's just the choice of 2 possibilities. So make sure you have that information, and then watch the videos. You scan them if you need to. Watch the videos, and you will be in very, very good shape for these tests. Okay, so good luck. Let me know if you've got any questions, and we will be talking soon.